How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this post-review discussion for Immortals Fenyx Rising. I am Joey, and I am joined by Michael Damiani from Easy Allies. How's it going, Michael?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So we both reviewed the game on our own respective channels. I gave it a liked it rating, and you gave it an 8.0 rating, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, 8.0 out of 10.
Yes, very significant.
People get creative with the scales nowadays, so you gotta clarify something important like that.
Exactly. Like ours is, I keep forgetting off the top of my head, but it's like an 8 or 9 point scale technically, but it's more on emotions than it is like a numbered system. And yeah, and for me, it's like I did like the game. I didn't like it a lot. I didn't love it. I also certainly didn't think it was mind blowing. And that kind of seems to be the consensus I'm seeing. It's a bit of a mixed reception, I would say. It all basically just depends to me on how people perceive the flaws in this game versus how they see how it does well.
It was very divisive, and it was more interesting. It wasn't necessarily that the scores were so extreme. It was more that what each review was praising and what each one was being more critical of seemed to drastically vary between reviews. I kept seeing people bring up to me how the IGN review was very critical of the puzzles, whereas I said I really enjoyed them, and I was like, oh, well, I mean, some puzzles have different appeal to different to different preferences, and these are, like, I enjoy mechanical puzzles that involve either solving things through physics-based or through mechanisms, like block pushing, like Zelda-style puzzles. And that's mostly what's here. I saw some people wondering, oh, is it like those cryptic puzzles where you're gonna, like, read clues? I'm like, it's not really like that. It's something different. So I can definitely tell people they'll be appealed to different ones. But yeah, the going between the things people liked, what didn't like, but obviously so many people were just, expectedly drawing comparisons between what they were doing in this game and Breath of the Wild, and to an extent Ubisoft's own Assassin's Creed games as well. Especially the older ones, I feel like were a little bit more similar to this style.
Absolutely, and it's hard to not compare this game to Breath of the Wild. It takes so much blatant influence from it. I mean, I'm sure you interview the developers, they'll say the same thing, because Breath of the Wild was a revolutionary open world game that basically is going to change how open worlds are perceived. Like, I remember when Skyrim came out, then everyone wanted to be open world in that sort of way. Even Assassin's Creed Odyssey took a lot of inspiration from Skyrim, but so many games did that. And we're going to see a lot of that coming forward with after the release of Breath of the Wild. And we had that with Genshin Impact, but I would even say Immortals is the first, like, really blatant, I don't want to say rip-off, but, like, blatantly it's the developers trying to figure out what made Breath of the Wild special. And in some sense they did succeed, but in a bunch of other senses they didn't succeed. And I think one of the best quotes I've heard is, it gets the exploration right, but not the discovery. And I think that is like a beautiful way to put it.
That's a good point. And yeah, if you want to differentiate between those two, that's definitely a very strong point, because right from the first time you get the ability to scout in the game encourages you. The things about marking a bunch of points of interest and going to those and seeing what's over there, and at first you think, oh, this is a handful, but you quickly realize, I think by the second zone, I'm like, holy crap, there are so many of these markers that I'm finding that towards the end, it overwhelms you, I think. And that's the difference here, whereas I think for the first, I would say maybe half of the game, even less than that, I felt very compelled to go out and seek out all that stuff. Especially because a lot of the ones that were puzzle-driven, I liked those. Some of them were the race to the end challenges with platforming involved. I liked that. It felt like the moment to moment, there was definitely more to do than Breath of the Wild. And that was kind of the honeymoon period with this game. Was, I like this. I think this was something that Breath of the Wild could have used, but then you start, when I got through most of the game, I realized, you know what, there isn't as much, as you said, discovery in this game, because you're kind of seeing everything. There are a few times you might go down into a cavern and see something, or you go to the beach area and there might be something over there, but it's kind of always in plain view. There isn't stuff tucked away. Like, they show off climbing, and it's more of a mechanism for traversal than the land isn't crafted in a way that it piques your interest. Like, what is over this edge?
Yes.
There's a few moments like that, but it does not come close to Breath of the Wild in that regard. And in that, Breath of the Wild blows this game away in that area by like a ton, like a light year.
It really does. And yeah, that's what I was trying to even figure out, especially because it is kind of hard to describe what makes Breath of the Wild's discovery so unique and so special. But I also think you put it brilliantly. It doesn't lay everything out in front of you. Like, you can go to a high peak in Breath of the Wild and see most of the world, but not so much to where you know where everything is. Even like zooming in on the Sheikah Slate, it doesn't like automatically tag things in the way that this game does. And also just bringing up the size of the world in general. Like the island in Immortals, it's as if you took Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, made it smaller, and as a result condensed every little activity inside of it. And that's when I appreciated the Breath of the Wild's emptiness. There was a lot of empty in that game. It wasn't just a lot of walking around. But whereas in Immortals, there's like so much to do, it kind of just becomes a little predictable at times.
Yeah, it also is. I feel like they are definitely going for two different atmospheres as well. Immortals it's definitely more story heavy. I feel like it has a little bit of a more guiding hand. You have the constant narration between Zeus and Prometheus at the bare minimum, as well as the other gods. It's kind of there to. It's kind of keeping you the sense of feeling like you're not really alone. It's more of an adventure game. It's adventure, it's action. Even though it's open world, it still feels kind of fast-paced at times. Where Breath of the Wild is a more methodical, definitely slower-paced game. It's about being alone. It's about being isolated. Even something as simple as the sound design in Breath of the Wild is about setting the tone, about being minimalist at times so that you take in your surroundings. It's more moment to moment in Breath of the Wild, and I think it's about survival for a lot of that game. You like, even just like the combat system, it's more leans towards character action-esque in Immortals, whereas Breath of the Wild, it's the slower, methodical, not quite, as robust as something like the Souls combat, but it goes on that side of the scale. And I think they were just shooting for two different things. And I think Ubisoft saw, hey, no one's really made a Breath of the Wild clone. Okay, obviously Genshin Impact just came out, but no one has really jumped on that bandwagon yet. And Nintendo themselves are taking a while with Breath of the Wild sequel. Hey, why don't we take a crack at making this type of game? Like, some people complained there wasn't enough to do in Breath of the Wild at times. Some people wanted more action-heavy combat. They basically, I think, took most of the criticisms that some people had with Breath of the Wild and just tried to go the other direction with that. And that's what you get with Immortals.
Exactly. And it sounds like we are criticizing this game a bunch, but we still gave it a good score. We still gave it our own little good scores because ultimately it is a fun game. It's a fun game. It's well crafted. It's just the way I said in my review. It's like, it's a good game. It's just not like people are going to remember it for eons, and it's not going to change the way like open world games are perceived. But not every game has to do that. Games can just be fun, and that's okay. And in that sense, I do enjoy the combat in this game. It is more character action based, like you said. It's not a hugely deep combat system, but it is deep enough to where it is considered fun. And I do see a lot of younger children who've like maybe never played a game like this before being more introduced or more weaned into this this type of genre of game better with Immortals, because it does simplify a lot of action RPG elements. And I love the upgrade system in this game. It is a more simple upgrade system, like especially with the potions, where you can upgrade the aspects of each and every potion, but it's not an overwhelming amount. It's not like menus upon menus. And just making Fenyx a more powerful character is fun in and of itself, and I love games that encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I was worried it might get a little too complex looking at everything they had, because there are so many different facets of it, but it feels like at most any single aspect only goes like 2 layers deep. Oh, here are your like power-up abilities, not your special skills, but like this will make your sword skills better. This will like give you a polish. They're like only 2 steps down on that. And then same thing when you go get all of your like unique special powers that you can use in real time. Those only had like 2 branches to them and usually only went 2 steps deep. I think actually the potions were like the ones that had the most steps on them.
Yeah.
And even then, I'll be honest, it was about 70% through the game before I remembered you could upgrade them. So I went through 70% of the game without upgrading any of my potions, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna be super overpowered now. But as you said, it's definitely more accessible. It's definitely easier to get into. I think it feels more gratifying in overall in most of the remedial fights. But there is a little bit of a skill ceiling if you want, like being able to do perfect parries, doing the perfect dodges, taking advantage of those. But if you use your other skills, you kind of don't even need to do that, as long as you just like dodge away and stuff. It kind of accommodates slightly different varying skill levels. And that's not to mention they have like the 5 different difficulties you can choose from. So if you feel it's being a little too easy, you know, just crank up the difficulty. And that's a nice touch. I will say the lack of enemy design, just like in Breath of the Wild, is a little bit disappointment. Open world games need to probably do a better job of that. We get spoiled by Souls games with these great enemy designs and varied designs, and it's something they could really work on. And I will say maybe I give the edge to the bosses in this game over Breath of the Wild's bosses, maybe. But I was really hoping that harder difficulty or harder iterations of enemies and bosses would include something a little bit more, other than they had felt like just had more HP, they had more, like, you know, they did more damage, and some of them were just faster, like they do their attacks faster, and that was really it. And it felt a little archaic.
Yeah, exactly. It was the enemy variety is probably the I want to say the most disappointing thing about this game, but it is definitely a disappointment when it comes to the overall combat, because yeah, like you said, they're just the same enemies but different colors, which means they attack faster or they attack stronger, and that was about it. And the more I think about it, the more I think, you know, this was a completely different game when it was announced last year. It was not even just a different title, but I saw development footage of the game that was leaked, and to think,
oh yeah, the early footage,
yeah, and to think, like, wonder how far along they were there before it looks like they revamped the game almost completely within a year. So I wonder if that has anything to do with kind of just the overall just, I wouldn't say underwhelming aspect of the game, but whelming aspect. It's a whelming game. It's a safe sort of game that it's kind of like how there are movies that are just not Oscar worthy, but not bad, but just good enough to kill time. That's kind of how I would describe Immortals in that sense.
That's fair. I think that's very, very fair to say. I think just like to use the Jurassic Park quote, you know, they stood on the shoulder of geniuses, but, you know, you didn't ask you didn't achieve the knowledge for yourself.
Yes.
They were building upon the success of Breath of the Wild, but at the same time, I think they were still maybe figuring out some stuff, because they were also, it wasn't just Breath of the Wild, they were taking Assassin's Creed, this long history of a series that's tried a lot of different things with open world as well, and I think they were trying to blend them together. At the end of the day, I think ultimately it is a little bit more Assassin's Creed than Breath of the Wild. I mean, it's pretty close, honestly. Yeah. But, I mean, people will make the most obvious surface level comparisons to Breath of the Wild, but I think when you really dig deep into it, you see kind of like the foundation and like the kind of like the tissue of, you know, of Assassin's Creed in there the most. And I hope they revisit this, because I think they can take the criticisms, the feedback from this, and actually take this and make it a little bit more unique the next time around, and have something that's a little bit more ambitious. Because I think if the number one thing all these reviews seem to be saying is that while it could be a good game, a very good game, it might need a little bit more ambition. It needs to maybe strive for something a little bit more excellent, because it's not quite Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild did something very unique, and this does not quite replicate that, and it's not even totally that. So I'd like to see them maybe revisit that at some point. But you're completely right, though, with what you were saying.
Yeah, I want them to continue this too, and not, like you said, not try to make it more of a Breath of the Wild replication, but of course have it do its own thing, do something special with it, while also, of course, taking the inspiration from Breath of the Wild, taking the inspiration from Assassin's Creed, and making something that is truly special. And maybe they can do that when they, you know, get rid of the last generation of consoles, because this game came out on like 9 freaking platforms.
Yes, it did. That was fun filling out available on. I was like, holy crap, this is we need to move on. Come on.
Oh man, yeah.
time for next gen to kick in here.
Yeah, and speaking of that, you played on PS5. I also played on PS5, but I also played it on PC and Switch. Did you play it on any other platforms, or was it purely PS5?
I only got a code for PS5.
Okay.
So I'm very curious, though. I assumed the PC version would run pretty decently. I expected PS5, Xbox Series X, and the PC to be the top with maybe one of the consoles. Sounds like maybe Series X might be the most optimized version from what I'm hearing. I'm not entirely sure. I'm just going off the reviews. But I'm curious about the Switch version because there were some people talking about that in their reviews, and it seemed to be... When I played this game, I was just like, there's no way this is going to run that well on Switch, is it?
Well, you're half right there. Okay. So one thing that I did get criticized for a little bit in my review was I didn't review this game after the patch was released. But the problem was the patch was released when the embargo lifted, so I couldn't fix much there. But
I hate that.
Yeah. So when I did try it out recently before recording this on the Switch with the patch installed, it did remove some of the fog that was notorious in some areas. And apparently the fog was there because of a story moment, but I don't know if that's true because I was in the same story moment on PS5 and there was like no fog there. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but it did improve the frame rate a little bit, not too much. I didn't see much of a huge improvement on the Switch port, but ultimately the Switch port's playable. It's still the same game with the same exact content. And the only problem I have with it is the frame rate does chug like quite a bit in the open world sections. Not so much to where it's unplayable, but so much to where I kind of just did expect this to at least have a stable 30 frames per second, especially considering the art style it's not an intensive art style. It's cell shaded, not very demanding, and also I would expect that game to run better on my PC, but for some reason I don't think the PC port's that good. Either that or my monitor's refresh rate is messing up because the PC footage I recorded looks smoother than me actually playing the game on PC. So I don't know what that's all about, but yeah.
Yeah, I see the visuals getting compared to like Fortnite, like that, going for that like aesthetic. In fact, there was some I saw some people see some concerns. I think it looked on PS5. I think it looked really nice. It ran pretty stable. I don't know if it was the same case with you. We were only allowed to play in performance mode. There was no
same for me.
Yeah, it wasn't available yet, so we weren't able to check out the higher resolution stuff. But I mean, I prefer that. I'll always take in these games, especially anything that has character action combat or action heavy combat. I will take the closer to 60 frames and then like lock 30 any day. There were some like nice lighting touches here and there, like when sunset happened, or like on the water with the reflections. There was some nice that. In general, some of the zones do look pretty nice. One thing I didn't really get to touch upon in my review because, I mean, it was already getting pretty lengthy. Economy of words is a fun thing. What is pick your most important battles? So it's not the end of the world, but there's definitely nuance to the different zones. Some of the zones. I feel like there's like 3 major types of zones, but there's really like 5 or 6. You have like a snow mountain. You have 2 green kind of pasture, like Greek hills themed areas. One has more like Greek architecture buildings. The other is a little bit more open fieldy. Then you got like 2 kind of like, you got like the ironworks and like the war area that kind of blend together a little bit.
They do.
Again, one has more structures. The other's kind of like war torn. So it's like this red, maroon, deserty like looking area for one side, green, nice area, and then a snow mountain. So it's like desolate, lush, or the snow area. I could have used a little bit more variety and just a little bit more. Breath of the Wild blows it away in that regard. I will say that. Like it felt like there were way more interesting environments to look at in Breath of the Wild than in this game. I don't know if you agreed with that or not.
I kind of do agree with it. Like, it's not something I really thought about, but yeah. And also, now that I think about it, maybe the game's a little too colorful, you know? Like, it's a little too
palette?
saturated.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it, but it's not, again, it's not that it looks bad. When it looks good, I think it looks pretty good, and it runs at a nice rate. And there's some of the areas that look good, and I said there's nuance. Even in, like, the Ares environment, I forget what it's called, like the war something, like you'll see like these arrows and these corpses just lying around. You'll see like a giant like freaking like arrow shield. It's like, okay, I get it. Like they put some effort into making this look a little bit more like, you know, like fleshed out. Like it has some personality behind it. And those later that snow zone was like, I loved it. It was like It's like, man, more of this. This is pretty good.
Exactly.
That really show it in the review, unfortunately. It's like,
of course,
why?
Yeah, it was more of like a linear sort of approach, but it benefited the story because it was just a story-heavy moment in that game when you finally get to Zeus's mountain. But also, speaking of story, yeah, that game, like, obviously it only gets so fascinating at a certain point when you keep making stories about Greek gods and whatnot.
Yeah.
And they were definitely going for like a comedic approach with this, but it was almost half-baked. They didn't fully commit to the silliness, and it also didn't really help that the facial animations were so strangely off. There was almost no expression, and they're cartoon faces. They should have expression.
That is, yeah. Pointing that out, it was something that it was just awkward. Is the best way to put it at points. I said it was like hit or miss because it's definitely going for the comedy. I didn't get into it in my review, except for saying I enjoyed the Zeus and Prometheus banter the most.
So did I.
I think they go through the most arc, which is funny because the 4 gods you're trying to help are supposed to have, like, they've been kind of like exiled and cursed. So you're trying to help them regain their normal form so that they go back to being their old way. Almost all of them, when they return back to normal, were one-dimensional, boring people. I think that's the point, though. Gods are supposed to be that. Mm-hmm. But like, I was like, I've seen this. I hate this. And their development for most of them, I didn't like some of the voice work, and I didn't like some of the writing for some of the. What was it for? I think it was Aphrodite or Athena. I think was the one I just didn't like the most. It was just not very intriguing. Whereas Ares, I liked Ares a lot, and Hephaestus. The Hephaestus stuff was pretty cool with how they expressed their emotion through their artwork, their creations, essentially. I was like, this is kind of dark and emotional here. So there's some winners, but there's also some really terrible low points as well. So I think they definitely could work on that. If they want to make a sequel, I think invest in that a little bit more, because this is maybe the cautionary tale to when people say Breath of the Wild didn't have enough story. It's like, sometimes it can end up like this, where it's like it's a mixed bag, to put it, the old cliche.
Exactly, and yeah, I agree with that. It is a mixed bag. It's kind of just the characters were just there most of the time, and I just didn't care about the story in general. It was a very typical type of story that, of course, took quite a bit of also inspiration from Breath of the Wild. Save for champions, and they affect the damage of the final boss. They're not optional. You have to do them. But something to think about for the sequel. And so, just to wrap up, we liked the game, I would say. Like, we gave it that sort of rating where it's not amazing, it's not bad either. It's a fun game that's good for killing a few hours. And if we're going to do the whole should you buy it, it's going to be I think it's still a $60 game even on next gen. So it's $60. I know a lot of people said maybe they'll wait for a sale, which I do feel like this is kind of a game you can wait for a sale. There's like no rush to get it either. And if the story is spoiled for you, it's a Greek god story. It's not anything super like God of War type story. It's a basic story. That's about it. And especially if you want to get it on multiple platforms like the Switch and the PS5, which is what I'm mostly jumping between on, you can definitely wait for a sale on that. I wouldn't recommend spending $120 on one game. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I would not. Yeah, would not recommend that either for this. And yet the game also just add a little bit to that. The game's not that long if you don't want it to be.
Yeah.
It was surprisingly short for what it was. If you just want to, maybe in the first, like me, I dabble around in a lot of stuff in the first 2 zones. Kind of like had my fill of that. Just moved along with the critical quest stuff. It was done in about like 30-ish hours, a little over 30 hours. Obviously, you want to do more than that. You're going to easily see that time go up, but it's on the shorter end of these open world games, so it will not destroy you like 100-hour plus, RPG adventure here.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I decided to switch over to the main quest stuff after I kind of just felt like I upgraded my character enough, even though all I wanted to do was just upgrade my character, because that's the part of the game I find so fun. But anyway, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. Where can we find you?
So you can find Easy Allies. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/EasyAllies. All of our video content is also on youtube.com/EasyAllies. We also We also stream on Twitch at, you guessed it, twitch.tv/EasyAllies. And if you want to follow me specifically, you can follow me at Damiani on Twitter.
Excellent. All those links will be down in the description below. In the meantime, thank you all so much for watching or listening to this discussion. Be sure to subscribe to Game Explain and hit that notification bell for more post-review discussions like this one. Until next time, bye.